Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Susie Dawson. I'm a journalist and activist and the current president of the Internet Party of New Zealand. I owe you deep apologies for the very protracted wait that you've had to endure tonight. I did everything I could to get the stream up and started on time, but had some major technical difficulties, which thank God I've managed to overcome. So here we are, we have made it, and we will be progressing with this, the third Deciphering JTRIG episode. And this is stream number 8 in the series Opening the Five Eyes, Exposing the Spies. So in this series, we've been digging into Snowden files, WikiLeaks files, manuals, and various details about the intelligence agencies of the Western world, how they operate, how they target people, and some of the egregious conduct that they have been engaging in. In these last couple of episodes, I've been working with clinical psychologist Lissa K. Johnson from Australia, who has done amazing work around WikiLeaks in the case of Julian Assange in particular. And we have been delving into the JTRIG files, which is the Joint Threat Research Intelligence Group of the GCHQ, which is the United Kingdom's version of the National Security Agency, the NSA. Those files employ a lot of psychological language when they talk about how they target people in online environments worldwide in order to smear them and destroy their reputations and indeed their lives. And that's why Lissa has been providing some really important educational context around what the terminology used in those documents really means. And I've been giving a bit of background personal experience from the perspective of a target and a journalist writing about and researching these issues, into the more practical side of how these tactics are employed against us. Just a brief little campaign update. I've been pretty AWOL for most of the last week. I've been doing some really important compliance tasks relating to my application for asylum here, for temporary asylum. I should have a decision on that on or around the 27th of November. So I'm about 17 days away now, roughly, from finding out my future, whether or not I will be able to settle in here as a temporary resident and begin somewhat of a normal existence, which would be wonderful if it happens. There's a bit of legal stuff and some medical compliance that I had to do. And so I've been taking care of that and making sure that all my T's are crossed and my I's are dotted, and that everything is supplied to the immigration authorities ahead of time. So I'm really sorry that I haven't been around very much. I may not be around very much in the first half of this week, but hopefully I'll be more active towards the end of the week. And then I have a special project going on in the last part of this month, which I'm not going to tell you anything about, other than that there is something cool happening and some cool people involved in it. Without further ado, tonight Lissa is going to drive the screen share. She's going to step us through the documents. We will pick up from where we left off last time. I will just warn you that because of the daylight savings changes, the time of these streams is pretty brutal for me. I'm starting at around 4 o'clock in the morning. So tonight I'm going to try and wrap this stream a lot sooner than we usually do. So don't expect a 3-hour epic. I think tonight will be less than half of that, hopefully, but we'll try and move briskly through the content. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for sharing the stream. Thank you for waiting around for it to start. I really do appreciate that. I know how frustrating it is for people when things don't start on time. Please make sure that throughout the course of the stream that you share the website for the campaign, number1 versus number5 letter I.com, the hashtag #1 versus number5 letter I. And of course, please, we're calling for donations to help to advance my lawsuits, my legal action against the agencies who are involved in targeting me. And that donate link is at 1versus5i.com/donate. I will just add as an addendum, there was a pretty major bit of progress this week where Martin Bradbury, who's a very famous, very well-known media stalwart, publishing stalwart, radio disc jockey, and independent journalist in New Zealand, who I had worked extremely closely with between 2012 and 2014. I was actually the person who brought him on board to run and to front the GCSB campaign against the New Zealand's NSA. I was the #1 social media influencer on that campaign. Martin Bradbury was the #2 social media influencer on that campaign. It was the two of us who were really driving it behind the scenes, particularly in the early days. And this week it was confirmed that Martin Bradbury, it was confirmed by the police themselves that he was targeted, and he had his bank accounts interfered with. He was flagged as a person of interest to police behind the scenes within the banking systems. He was denied loans and had his accounts interfered with. He had information about him accessed without a warrant. When he tried to take a human rights tribunal case against the police about this, they attempted to introduce secret evidence and make it a secret court hearing that no one could report on. And he's fought this battle against them for 5 years, and this week he won. This week the police dropped they withdrew their case, and they issued a formal public apology to him. They confirmed that, yes, they had targeted him, yes, they had been accessing his information without a warrant, and yes, he had suffered in various ways as a result of that. We also learned that he had been deemed, they had done this under the guise of computer fraud. And of course, Martin was not involved in any computer fraud whatsoever, which the police admit in their apology letter. And so this is yet another important step for me, as he's now the third person who has successfully sued the police. And the police are one of 5 agencies that I'm taking legal action against for their abuses against me and my family as well. So that was big news this week. It was yet another straw on the donkey's back and proving that what I've been saying all along is true. And so I'm happy for the vindication of that, and also happy for Martin, who has fought such a hard fight, and something really good has come of it now. The police have a confidential settlement that they have agreed to in his case, as well as the public apology. So, okay, I'm going to hand over to Lissa now. Lissa, please take it away.
Okay, well, thanks for having me back, Susie. Right, let me share the screen. Last time we were about 2/3 of the way through, I think, the JTRIG files. Is that screen share showing?
Perfect.
Great.
I can see it.
Excellent. So we've been talking through, for people who haven't seen the first 2 episodes, talking through psychological strategies outlined in these slides, whose purpose is to deceive people and discredit targets and degrade and destroy and disrupt. So we were sort of halfway through the second last line here. We talked about the other lines in terms of what they meant around exploiting attention and perception and sense making in order to sort of trick people into believing things and seeing things. And we finished off after talking about the line that describes affect, which is essentially emotion, and the first 3 boxes instructing GCHQ staff to create stress, which, we closed the stream and I walked away thinking, that's really quite surreal for me as a psychologist, talking about psychological strategies and literatures being used to inflict stress on people. And I mean, most psychologists who are practitioners spend all their time trying to counteract stress and reduce the negative effects of stress on people. So here we are doing the opposite. So it comes back once again to the deeply unethical and harmful nature of these practices, and the misuse of psychological strategies. At the beginning, Susie talked about it being the weaponization of psychology, and these 3 boxes really sort of point to that. So the 3 boxes about creating stress, which we talked about last time, are followed by the box that says Cialdini +2. Cialdini, we talked about before, is a researcher in psychology who put together a bunch of principles of persuasion. He's done decades of research, and he's one of the best known psychologists who works in the field of persuasion. He's come up with 6 principles of persuasion, which are intended to be used for marketing. We talked those through. We'll come to them again in a subsequent slide. The +2, I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about. In a subsequent slide, they've combined Cialdini's 6 principles with the 7 principles of scams, so that could be what they're talking about. But the fact that that comes after the 3 boxes about creating stress says to me that this is saying that when you create stress, people are more manipulable. So these principles of persuasion, which involve tugging on people's propensity to conform and to obey authority, to say yes to people who they like, all those principles are likely to be more effective when people are stressed. The third slide, there's a positive negative. That would mean positive or negative stress. So positive stress is being sort of underperformance stress that brings out the best in you, makes you kind of alert and engaged. Negative stress is distress, so stress caused by, fear, threat, loss, rejection, the loneliness, all of those kinds of things. And when people are suffering negative stress, they're much more susceptible to, say, conformity. If they feel alone or threatened, group belonging becomes more important and more powerful force to exploit, which is what these slides are all about. Or, when people feel frightened, they're more likely to obey authority, looking for authority figures to help them feel safe. So the authorities around, the principles around exploiting perception of authority are likely to be more effective. So I think that's what that's talking about. And then the next slide talks about exploiting. I mean, this whole line is extremely exploitative. You're distressing people in order to exploit them using psychological principles, is what this is saying. And when that's directed against people for political reasons, that's obviously really alarming. Exploit shared affect, that's shared emotion. That's useful in a lot of ways in that similarity breeds liking. One of Cialdini's principles is that people say yes to those they like. That's partly what that's talking about. And shared affect also would exacerbate sort of a sense of, enhance a sense of group belonging, being part of the same group, being part of the in-group, and that makes, all those processes of conformity and herding easier to tug on. So, I think that's what that's talking about, exploiting emotion. Then the fourth line, behaviour. That's mostly pretty self-explanatory. Simulate the action. A lot of what they're talking about here is, faking things. So they talk about befriending a target. So that might, for instance, be befriending a journalist or befriending an activist in order to infiltrate a movement or to encourage them to behave in a certain way. They talk about what they're wanting to do is to make things happen in the real or online world. So simulate the action of a fellow activist, or simulate, they talk about posting false flags or fake blog posts, even fake book chapters, fake texts or emails. So I think that's what that's talking about, simulate the outcome. A false flag is simulating an outcome. They talk about fake victim posts. So again, it's all about, that mimicry and pretense. Time shift perceived behaviour just means when you're retelling something, alter the sequence of events, and then that can shift perceptions of causality. That happened in the whole Russiagate narrative, smearing Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. When you look at it in detail, the time frame doesn't pan out according to the Russiagate narrative. Things didn't happen in the time frame that fit that narrative, but that was distorted in order to push the Russiagate smear of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Divorce behaviour from outcome. When they talk about making things happen, and part of what they're wanting to make happen here is to discredit targets and destroy their reputations, and they're wanting to befriend people and influence people to make that happen, whether fellow activists or thought leaders in a movement or journalists or potentially even other influential targets, you need to divorce that kind of really harmful behaviour from the harm in order for someone to engage in it. So, war propaganda is an example, and they talk about propaganda in these slides where, a lot of war propaganda makes everybody feel like they're really just sticking it to the leader of a country. Well, you're not. You're killing the people of the country. Or sanctions are framed. They're, punishing a dictator, but they're punishing the people, and they're punishing the most vulnerable people. But that real outcome needs to be divorced from the action of sanctions or war for people to go along with it. One of the earlier slides talked about legitimizing violence, and I see this as connected to that, or even just legitimizing the smearing, making it easier for people to engage in that and perpetrate that. Channel behavior, that's pretty self-explanatory. Taking, say, activism, it does involve a fight against an injustice, where you're taking that fight, that oppositional behaviour, you're trying to oppose injustice or wrongdoing and channeling it towards a different target. So, people think that what they're doing is justifiable, but this is all about, directing it to a different end. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Susie?
What you were just saying about war propaganda, there was a post tonight from the official communications channel for the US Air Force, I guess, operation in conjunction with an so-called Iraqi counterterrorism team, where they dropped 36 tons of bombs on what they said was a Daesh and ISIS island. And they had aerial footage of this island, like green and filled with trees and surrounded by water. And you couldn't see any settlements or anything on the island. It just looked like a topical view of the island. And then this music kicks in, this really it's a movie music soundtrack. And then you just see these bombs exploding all over the island from one end to the other, and spectacular, it's a fireworks show. And they're it was an ISIS infested island, but we've taken care of it. And then you see all the comments on this is a tweet on Twitter from a verified military account. And then there's all these tweets on the thread going, yeah, great job, well done, guys, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking to myself, ISIS is pretty disgusting. What they do is incredibly disgusting. I don't actually feel very much empathy for ISIS whatsoever, but I'm pretty damn sure that for every single one ISIS fighter or whatever that was on that island, that there was probably 10 civilians, women, children, and God knows who else, captives maybe even. So is carpet bombing the island really a great thing to be doing? And with all of the problems that the world's currently facing, is this really what our priority should be? Carpet bombing an island with 36 tons of bombs and then writing tweets about how fantastic it is. And I just thought that was a classic example of war propaganda. And the thought that couldn't escape me was that if you bomb one person and you tweet about it, you're a terrible criminal, you're going to jail for life. There's probably laws being passed about preventing social media platforms from letting you post that tweet. But if you're dropping 36 tons of bombs and killing hundreds of people at a time, you can do it from your verified Twitter account, and it's totally cool. There's no problem with that. And for me, that was all about the legitimization of violence, and it was pure war propaganda. And it was presenting what actually is the deaths of real people as a fireworks show. And I just found that to be really repulsive. In terms of the slide that you were just looking at, there's something I just noticed there, which is that the first three lines are operations and the methods that are being employed in the online environment, but the last two lines are real-world effects. So the stress that is being caused is not digital stress, it's physical stress. It's physical, it's being manifested in the real world environment. And the behavior is occurring in the real world environment, but the attention grabbing, the perception management and the sense making, these are being perpetrated from a digital environment. So I felt like that shows really clearly that crossover between the digital targeting and the real world impacts.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it sort of encapsulates what they talk about, making things happen in the digital or real world. Yeah, the actions, I mean, some of the actions might be online in terms of smearing someone online, but then the outcome of that, destroying someone's reputation and life, is very much in the real world, isn't it? And that would be the outcome.
And also their language is so passive, like making something happen in the real world. You know, I mean, that something could be driving someone to suicide. That something could be destroying their marriage. That something could be destroying their career forever. The effects, the something is actually something terrible, something devastating, something lasting, something profound, but they don't make it sound like that. They make it sound like a ripple in a pond situation.
Yes.
Really, this is what they're doing, is creating a tsunami in someone's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, derailing a movement, if that's a movement to prevent a journalist and publisher from being tortured to death in prison, then the outcome is, devastating in terms of not just that journalist's life, but the implications for other journalists and democracy and human rights. So, yes, you're right. That's a good point. And the fireworks, sort of, that happens a lot with war, doesn't it? It's as if you're watching a fireworks show, which is a good example of divorcing the behaviour from the outcome. It's true. So this slide, I assume, is about conformity. They're talking about group processes in some of the slides that come after. I mean, I guess they're using another culture's conformity because it's always easier for people to see social processes in other groups rather than their own groups. I mean, this could easily just be a group of people with, pink hats protesting, or MAGA hats, or football jumpers, or, but I think they're using another culture's practices because that, is more recognisable to us than our own conformity. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's spot on. I think also that I wouldn't consider, given the time period that these slides were prepared in, that they are somehow using some form of Islamophobia to make it appear as if their targets are terrorists, because this is
that's a good point. Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, they wouldn't want to make it obvious that they're targeting internal dissidents.
It's the otherization, right? Because they have to otherize their targets.
Absolutely, yes. And it's also kind of symbolic that they're faceless. I mean, that's another way of inuring people to the harm that they're causing, is making other people faceless and a homogenous mass rather than individual human beings.
And yet the faceless homogenous mass, I mean, that's also a great example of them projecting, because really this is exactly what they're doing in the online world, is they're making themselves into the faceless mass of people.
True, true. Strand 2, influence and information operations. Actually, I've got a little definition of information operations here, which is interesting. It fits in with everything that we're talking about, but it's from a Joint Chiefs of Staff document, and they define information operations as the integrated employment of information-related capabilities in concert with other lines of operation to influence, disrupt, corrupt, or usurp the decision-making of adversaries and potential adversaries. So to corrupt, usurp decision-making and influence decision-making, which is what all this is about.
And also on that slide it says online covert action accreditation. So this is you get a little certificate once you have learned how to destroy people's lives.
And essentially cognitive infiltration, infiltrating people's minds and covertly influencing what they think and what they do. So these 10 principles of influence, they referred to them earlier as the 10 principles of scams. I mean, in the psychological literature, there's 7 principles of scams and 6 principles of persuasion, and they've kind of combined them here into 10 principles. We've already talked about quite a few of them. The time principle is just the idea that when you put people under time pressure, they're much more manipulable because they'll take mental shortcuts. And all of the things we've talked about so far are essentially kind of mental shortcuts, psychological and emotional shortcuts to decision making and perception and action, rather than doing things in a considered way, gathering information. It's obviously exploiting people's psychological vulnerabilities, and that's much easier when people are under time pressure. The need and greed principle, that's from the principles of scams. Just to put it in context, there's a paper on the 7 principles of scams that was put together by an academic who I think specialises in cybersecurity rather than psychology, and also the fellow who did the BBC show The Great Hustle, I think it was called. They put a paper together on how to scam people on the 7 main principles. So need and greed is basically just about exploiting people's needs, which we've talked about, emotional needs for belonging, acceptance, self-worth, safety. Those are tugged on to exploit people's tendencies to conform or obey authority and so on. Greed principle, rather than just exploiting emotional needs, also greed, for instance, need for accolades or status or achievement. If they can sort of assess somebody to be kind of status seeking, for instance, they can use that as an emotional sort of way in to exploit the person, frame something as a way for that person to elevate themselves within their group or within their career. So, you can imagine a lot of uses for that, whether in activism or journalism or academia. So the deception principle is just basically using all of these principles to deceive people, which is what these slides are all about. The dishonesty principle is it's kind of the honey trap, honeypot is an example of that. It's luring people into doing something dishonest and then using that to elicit their compliance. So I guess it's kind of blackmail, and that's used in scams, and of course it's used with things like honeypots. So that's what that's talking about. The social compliance authority principle we've talked about, that's people's propensity to say yes to those they perceive to be an authority figure or a credible expert. The herd principle, again, is conformity, the tendency to look to others, especially in your own group, to guide your own behaviour, your own thinking, your own attitudes. The consistency principle we talked about, which is that people like to behave in ways that are consistent with the ways they've already behaved. So a tactic is to make a very small request. For instance, getting a journalist to publish a very small negative piece of information against a target, so Julian Assange, Jeremy Corbyn, whoever, and then feed more damning, more extreme pieces of information. People will be more likely to accept that if it's consistent with public positions they've already taken. The distraction principle we talked about, that's with attention, treating attention as a spotlight. If you can dazzle, decoy, distract, misdirection is a form of distraction, then people don't see the secret action. So we talked about Russiagate being a great big distraction, while outside of that attentional spotlight, there's war on dissent and independent media and journalism, essentially democratic rights and freedoms being dismantled while people are distracted. And the reciprocity principle is the principle that you're likely to say yes to people that you feel you owe. So to elicit a target's compliance and obedience, do something for them, and they'll be more likely to say yes to you. And the flattery principle, again, people say yes to those they like, and people like people who pay them compliments. So these are all basic principles that obviously people are being, GCHQ staff are being trained to deploy. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can see really clear real world examples for most of those. The time principle I've seen actually the other way around. So rather than you being told there's a really short time frame and then pressured on that short time frame, it's been where there is a short time frame and they have to act to counter you within that short time frame. That's what I see. And it's kind of like when I talked about in my documentary about an opportunity arises, you move to take that opportunity, you open the curtains and there's a brick wall, and they are the brick wall. They create the brick wall. They identify that you're going to do something, you're going to do it within this time frame, and that's how long they have to mess it up for you, and they will do so. And it's usually revealed to you at the crucial moment. The sabotage is revealed at the crucial moment, rather than and I guess that's the magician's sleight of hand stuff a bit as well, because you don't see it coming until the crucial moment. I have seen that many times. I'm thinking of a specific example where we had been to see our lawyer at Occupy. There had been a tight chokehold on access to the lawyer. We broke the chokehold by unexpectedly going a different route to get to the lawyer after the first eviction at our occupations. And there was rumours that we thought that there would be a second eviction. We went and managed to get into the lawyer and speak to him. He said, yes, I have credible information. There will be a second eviction. It will be at this time. You need to report this back to your Occupy people. We went racing back to the occupation to tell everybody, because there was a big meeting on, tell everybody exactly what the lawyer had said. And the saboteurs jump up on a chair and say, literally, they see us coming and they're like, meeting's over, everybody can go, don't worry about it. And we're like, no, we've just seen the lawyer, we need to talk to everyone. And they say, no, your information from the lawyer is old. Nobody needs to hear that. No, meeting over. And like they're dispersing people as fast as they can because they don't want us to relay the information that we've got from the lawyer. And sure enough, following morning second eviction, there's another raid of the occupying second eviction happens exactly as the lawyer said was going to happen. So it's more like where there's time sensitive information that needs to be transmitted, where there's some I won't name him, but I don't think he'd mind anyway. Somebody significant submitted a signed, notarized affidavit in support of my application for asylum here. There's a fixed time period that has to be received here in Russia, has to be translated to Russian, notarized and submitted in order for it to be considered. We had plenty of time because it's a 3-month process. That person tried to engage couriers, we got tracking numbers, everything to get the documents here to Russia. The tracking showed that they left Washington, D.C., went to New York, was somehow left New York and went back into New York. Twice it shows them arriving in New York, and then dispatched to Russia, never arrived in Russia. The tracking system then says, complete. This has been signed off. Yes, the process has happened. Someone's collected it. So we say, well, it hasn't come. So what courier service did you give it to in Russia? Oh, we don't know. We can't tell you that. Well, who did you hand the package to? Oh, we don't know. We can't tell you that. Like 5 weeks goes by, and the package still doesn't arrive in Russia. And now it has just arrived back in the hands of the person who sent it, saying that failed to be collected in Russia, though we're very sure it never even made it to Russian soil. It never left New York. So then there's a continuing sabotage. So they have a situation where they know Susie needs these documents by this date. This is a significant piece of evidence that could make a material difference in her case. Therefore, we will sabotage by whatever ridiculous means necessary in order to make sure that information never reaches her. That's the type of the type of way that I see time used, where they identify that there is a restricted period of time in which they would need to meddle in order to create an outcome that they want to achieve. I can't think of a example where I've been pressured to do something like you need to do this within a day, or you need to do this but then I would be extremely resistant to that, so maybe they just wouldn't try that with me. I don't know.
Wouldn't bother. They've got you profiled.
I'm very good at saying no to people, so
that's a good point. That's a good point. Someone else would.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you had a different psychological profile, then perhaps they would use that as a tactic.
And you can imagine that working with journalists. I mean, journalists are often under tight deadlines, and if it's a big story and, it needs to be broken before X and Y and Z, you could imagine that could encourage a journalist to fact check less or be more open to whatever's being pushed. But yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like you're saying time pressure is used to undermine performance, undermine your ability to do what you need to do, which also fits in with what the text document that hopefully we'll get time for today, or if not another time, talks about disrupting communications and preventing delivery of material, which is what you're talking about there. So back to the slide. Coca-Cola. I don't have anything to say about that, Susie. Just an effective marketing campaign, I guess.
Yeah, maybe it'd be interesting to see what comes next.
Perhaps it's about. So they do talk about tailoring methods across cultures. Maybe that's what that's about.
God, that reminds me of the Weet-Bix ads. Weet-Bix is a popular cereal down under, wheat biscuits. I'm trying to think of what the equivalent would be in the United States. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But the advertising campaign in New Zealand when I was growing up was Kiwi kids are Weet-Bix kids, and it was all around like this nationalized, like this whole, national identity is eating the cereal for breakfast. And I remember then going to Aussie with my family and hearing Aussie kids are Weet-Bix kids and being like, what?
Yeah, that's the one I grew up with. Yeah.
And feeling so betrayed, like, how dare you? But you said it was for New Zealand. Now it's for Australian kids.
You tricked us. Well, actually, yeah, this makes more sense now with this slide coming next. Brand camp.
Brand camp.
So this is about 5 stages of product adoption, and 5 down the bottom, the innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards. That's about 5 types of adopter for new products. So I think they're likening pushing a deception to selling a new product. And I think what they're doing is identifying 5 groups that require different strategies to target those groups with your deception or whatever it is that JTRIG is trying to get off the ground. So, innovators are the ones who start out with the product when it's brand new. So, wow, they take it on. And in terms of, I think this might fit in with, we talked about earlier that they're talking about targeting people based on their personality, and that, personality can be assessed approximately by digital footprint, or perhaps even not so approximately, fairly precisely by digital footprint, thanks to SCL and Cambridge Analytica. So the innovators are likely to be risk takers. They like new things, they're happy to sort of explore new horizons. So personality-wise, they'd be likely to be high on openness.
It's the Julian Assange right there.
Yeah, true. Yeah, they'd be likely to be high on openness and low on neuroticism. So emotionally unflappable and, love new things. So I guess this is saying that in terms of targeting people based on their psychological profiles, when you wanted to get something off the ground, those are the people you'd target. Early adopters tend to be, so as you go from there to the laggards are the ones who only adopt a product once everyone else is using it and it's kind of old hat and even, getting to be old news. So that would be the opposite of the innovators. That would be people low on openness and possibly quite high on neuroticism. They'd be very risk averse, don't like change, set in their ways, like to just stick with what they know, and kind of spectrum in between with the early adopters and the early majority. So, early adopters apparently active on social media, tend to be what they call thought leaders, kind of high status. So once the innovators introduce something, the early adopters go, brilliant, yes, let's run with it. And then the early majority are sort of bit less risk, you're a bit more risk averse, in contact with thought leaders but not thought leaders themselves. And then the late majority, that's more the conforming kind of wider group, so kind of in the middle on risk averseness and being willing to try new things, more likely to look to what everybody else is doing to adopt it. So you'd be targeting, so that would sort of be moderate, you'd expect, on openness, and sort of maybe moderate on neuroticism. So I guess they'd be targeting, that might affect the timing at which they target different people, or the strategies. The late majority, you'd be more likely to use kind of conformist-based strategies. This is what everyone's saying, this is what everyone's doing, creating that perception. Whereas with innovators, you'd be framing something as really cutting edge. So but obviously here it's not talking about selling a product, it's talking about selling a deception, because these slides are called The Art of Deception. So that's what that would be about. What do you think, Susie?
It's really interesting that you look at it in terms of personality type, because I look at those two things and I see motivation and I see risk. So the motivation of the innovator is that they don't see what's wrong. I mean, I'm sure they take it into account, but they're not deterred by what's wrong with something. They actually see its potential and its promise. They're looking at what can this be? What will this be in 5 years? What will this be in 10 years?
Which would make sense with personality, because being, risk takers and high on openness, they like the newness, they like the novelty. Being low on neuroticism, that is by definition being less worried about risk. It's less fearful, less, easily.
And also more forgiving. Forgiving, because they're not being judgmental about it. They won't sink the ship just because certain parts are rotten. They will actually salvage and try and improve and evolve them. Of course, that is the highest risk time to be buying into, even emotionally buying into something, a new brand or a new product or a new solution, invention or whatever. You see there with Ashton Kutcher has bought one, that is a completely different motivation. That motivation is I don't actually care about the brand or the product at all. What I care about is the social status that it can bring to me.
Exactly. Yes, and a sense of belonging and acceptance, and that's sort of part of that whole social identity thing. You buy into it because that's what your group's doing. It's important to your identity to be part of the group. It's driven more by those motivations, you're right, which you would expect with a personality profile. Not that I'm huge on personality, and it's a very rough approximate way of understanding people. I'm not crazy about, pigeonholing people based on, but I mean, that's what these slides are about doing, though. So thinking from the point of view of someone who's using these slides, someone who is more motivated by doing what the group is doing, you'd expect to be, say, personality-wise, lower on openness but high on agreeableness. So you want to get along with people, you want to cooperate, but you're not so sort of open to experience that you'll be going out on your own to, try new things, kind of thing. So, which fits in with what you're saying.
And then the laggard has no motivation really to do anything other than watch television, and and arguably television saps motivation, and of course that's the lowest risk activity that they could involve themselves in.
And just sticking with the familiar. So I think this is just a summary of really everything that we've talked about. I'm just talking about now. People make decisions as part of groups, some more than others. And people make decisions for emotional reasons, not rational ones, by and large. I mean, this is obviously what they're tagging on. And the tape, I think, psychologists often talk about the tape that we play to ourselves in our mind about the world. So I assume they're drawing on that, turning it into a heart to say that it's really very emotionally driven.
Because it wouldn't make rational sense to do that to your tape.
True.
The memification of the industrialization of manipulation. This is what, if I can sum this up, this is what it is. Their own audience, who are supposed to be the best and the brightest, that they pick out of every grad school, they are speaking to them in memes.
True. Yes. Yeah, they're using the same tactics on them in a lot of ways.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. The principles that they're using to manipulate the population are, and by and large, the same principles that they're using to manipulate their own staff.
Yes. And I'm sure the group motivations and obedience to authority and so on are being heavily tugged on. But just one thing I think I haven't said about the group dynamic is that that would be a very important, effective part of discrediting somebody, because people will go to great lengths not to be ostracised by a group. When people are ostracised, the same part of the brain that fires off when you're in physical pain fires off as a result of ostracism. So if you can make a target look like an out-group member, shunned from the group, ostracised from the group, that's a powerful way to get people to back away from that person, not support them, be motivated to denigrate them, smear them, whatever, in order to preserve their own group belonging and not be ostracised themselves, which fits in with that. Social creativity. I mean, I don't have any, this doesn't map onto anything that I'm familiar with in psychology. It just in a self-explanatory way, I guess it fits into what we're talking about before about, brand acceptance. You seed it when it's new. It gets converted across those dimensions of adoption and it gets shared.
So this is something I saw a lot of, is where they would actually seed disinformation about people to discredit them to as broad an audience as possible. They would wait for that, the feedback loop of someone or someone's in that audience then feeding back the smear, and then they would reference that. So it would be such and such's dad is a property developer and he's rich and therefore he's working for the 1% and you shouldn't trust this person, and then that becomes a Chinese whisper, and then the same person who's seeding that will then go, Alice said that such and such's dad is a property developer and blah blah blah. It's like again, it's that laundering process.
Yes,
last week about laundering smears. They'll do that. Exactly that. They'll seed the smear, they'll wait for it to reverberate, and then they'll pick up the reverberations and use them as a mask to hide behind. Converting it. It's like they seed the smear, they convert the smear, and then they share it as if it's fresh and new, and they just hurt it.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's really insidious.
They're framing nationality as a brand there, I guess. Do you have anything else to say about that slide, Susie?
I just don't have a clue what they think they're doing there. I don't have a clue. I mean, that's Egypt, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And interestingly, this is Egypt ahead of the uprising as well. In terms of when these documents were produced.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they're saying that, nationalism and national pride is, their goal is to exploit that just like they would.
I think it's the headscarves. I think that she's holding a flag and then she has a headscarf that's also the flag. Yes,
you're right. Yeah. This one I'm not sure. Making fun of Whole Foods markets. And I guess this is.
I think it's the $4.99 a pound, regularly $5. So it's giant $4.99 a pound, cheap, and then the tiny little regularly $5.99 in the bottom right corner. That's what I assume is going on there.
Makes sense. And I guess this is about getting people to believe a round circle is, a flying saucer. I assume this is more on that. It's kind of illustrating all the processes of deception and manipulation of perception that they've talked about. And I guess this is adopting, age-old strategies to new technologies. Do you think, Susie?
Yeah, absolutely. With the wheels, absolutely, and the cameras. Sure.
So strand 3, online human intelligence. So this is the ocean model that we talked about. This is, assessing people's personalities by remote assessment of digital cues, they call it, and target audience analysis.
We actually have cut a segment from that first episode of you describing exactly this principle, and it's in our publishing queue to go out on YouTube as a separate video. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that, because you did really thoroughly explain each of those principles, and it was fascinating.
And yeah, these are the 5 factors of personality that Cambridge Analytica assessed and drew on to target manipulable voters with targeted messaging in 2016. So this, I think, is talking about befriending, especially in the context of slides that come later, and probably talking about drawing on a personality profile to use this little cycle of simulating, I guess, development of a relationship. So this kind of encapsulates some of the principles we've talked about before. The certainty is there, I think, because it's drawing on a theory from the 1970s, which is a bit old-fashioned, but I'm pretty sure that's what they're talking about, called uncertainty reduction theory. And it's just saying that in order for relationships to progress, people need to reduce their uncertainty about the other person, which isn't, there's no great mystery. That makes sense. You want to know who the other person is and what you can rely upon them to do and be. So I think this is saying, in order to increase someone's certainty about you, they need to like you. The more they like you, the more certain they are, the more they'll self-disclose. That the disclosure ties in with that social penetration theory we talked about, which is that as relationships progress, people gradually self-disclose more to each other and go into more depth and disclose on a greater range of topics. That increases people's liking of each other, which increases their certainty, which will increase their disclosure. And we've talked about other factors that feed into liking, flattering somebody, having similarity and similar goals and similar emotions, working towards a shared objective. So I think that's what that is about as a tactic for befriending targets, which they talk about in the accompanying documents. Which obviously would be important for infiltration.
Well, so how many slides are remaining in the online human intelligence?
2. The last ones I don't. That one is psychological. So that's what's left. There's only a few that are psychological left. There's not a lot to say. After this, there's not a lot to say, actually, about the slides.
There are some really big, there are some very famous slides coming up.
It's true. There are famous,
And ones in which I certainly have a great deal
to say.
Absolutely. Two of those slides in particular are almost a stream in of themselves.
Okay, I take that back. I was gonna speed through that hierarchy of needs, but it sounds like you've got more to say about it. Yeah. Well, shall we keep going, or did you want to?
Sure. Just the online human intelligence ones. Can you show me again?
So
this one pretty much we can look at it. Pretty much
it fits into that about befriending a target.
Sure.
This is the hierarchy of needs, which is it's a bit discredited, this hierarchy, but the needs are all still valid, obviously. So that's it in the online human intelligence.
Okay, sure. Let's knock it out.
So I think this expands on how to befriend somebody, so mirroring and to mimic, I guess, a fellow activist or whoever it is that the JTRIG employee is they're pretending to be online, whoever their alias is supposed to be. So mirroring people's body language, expression, turns of phrase, and so on will help be a credible, member of whatever group they're trying to infiltrate. Accommodation, adjustment of speech patterns and language towards another person. So same sort of idea. People tend to start adopting similar speech patterns, and that will enhance sort of likability and sense of being fellow, fellow whatever it is, group members. over accommodation may look condescending. I guess they're saying don't overdo it or it'll come across as fake. And mimicry, they're all sort of different ways of saying the same thing. So can I gain this is the question they're asking people to ask themselves. So how can I use this to exploit and deceive people?
So I think the creation of shared language and employment of shared language, and I would also say that the mimicry and mirroring is not just digital, it's also physical. For example, if they want to portray themselves physically as an activist when they're not, it will be the guy with the dreadlocks and the funny spectacles and the beat up old man who smokes weed. Like they'll take these stereotypes of how they see activists. It's actually right. their idea of how an activist is, and then they'll adopt that themselves. And you see that right across the board with the spy cops. Also, my own experience in New Zealand. They always are the people with the funny hats, the funny hair, the funny wigs. There's always exaggerated characteristics about them and how they physically appear. And I think that's part of this magician stuff too, because they're wanting to draw your attention to certain things about them that in their normal life they don't have or display. So it's part of the guise, it's part of the mask. It's part of the mask.
Not that we want to go around being suspicious of everybody who's a bit eccentric.
No, exactly. You don't. I'm not saying be suspicious of the guy who smokes weed and has dreadlocks, because there are a lot of people who smoke weed and have dreadlocks. You know, it doesn't mean they all work for the police. But they do try to take these personas that they think an activist will least be likely to be suspicious of. And that have physical characteristics which are unmissable. Unmissable physical characteristics.
So this one. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which again is a bit old-fashioned in psychology, just in the sense that this hierarchy isn't necessarily accepted as the way it works. You know, there's actually reason to believe that belongingness and love needs might even be more fundamental than physiological needs. But these are, of course, all sort of really basic, common human emotional and physical needs. And all I really was going to say about this is when they talk about exploiting people's emotions and their psychology and, you know, exploiting tendencies towards social identity with groups and obedience to authority. These are all the basic human emotions and needs that they're seeking to exploit and draw on to manipulate people. So, you know, needs for safety. If you make people frightened, like I was saying before, they're more likely to say yes to authority, to double down in their groups. If people are frightened of being ostracized, that belongingness need is going to be at risk. So conformity pressures will be easier to exploit. You know, and they're talking about mimicking at least emotionally intimate relationships and physically intimate by engaging in honey traps, which a separate group of slides talks about, or friends. You know, that's what all of that social penetration theory is exploiting those needs, esteem needs, all tied up with all of that, not being ostracized, not being seen, to, you know, be an outcast, and self-actualization. You know, that could be used in all sorts of ways, tagging on people's goals as an activist, as a journalist, their goals in political movements, exploiting those to a different end than the person is really intending to pursue. Well, yeah, Susie, what did you want to say about that slide?
I'd say look at it from the perspective of a manipulator, wanting to build trust with a target or an activist. To convince somebody that you love them and care about them, you need to at the very least, exhibit concern. Like, how am I with my children? Have you eaten? Have you eaten your breakfast? Would you like something to drink? Blah, blah, blah. This is because I genuinely love my children. If you are a manipulator, that will be, are you getting enough water? Are you blah, 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 blah. I'm thinking actually the camp mother at Occupy. The kitchen had free access to financial resources so it was actually quite a great position if you wanted to squander or control resources. The kitchen was a good place to do it. But the kitchen was also, I am the person who feeds you. I am the person who makes food for you and gives you food every day. I can be trusted. You can confide in me, etc., etc., etc. So what I see is that exploitation, or I see that each of these needs can be exploited by a manipulator who can use the same signals as someone who genuinely loves you would. If you could just put the chart up again for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody who genuinely loves you is going to care about whether you've eaten, whether you've had enough to drink, whether you're warm, or whether you've had enough sleep. They're going to care about whether you are physically secure and whether you feel safe. They're going to engage in friendships and intimate relationships with you. And they're going to encourage you to engage in activities which result in feelings of accomplishment. They're going to be proud of you when you achieve things. They're going to cheerlead you and support you as you do. And they may even encourage you towards creative activities. Now, where this gets really problematic and really difficult, and this is also why it's so criminal that they do this, is that that's also what a genuine person who actually loves you is going to, of natural causes, do. Yeah, just like that's why I use my kids as an example, because I'm the same with all. I tell my son, "You're an awesome dancer. You should dance more." I tell my daughter, you encourage these things in them. You connect with them on each of those levels, and you show genuine care and concern for each of those levels, and with real friendships and real relationships. And unfortunately, that's exactly what they play on, but they do it for nefarious means and in damaging ways, because the inevitable end result, once those things have been manipulated and used against you, is the breaking of trust. And once you have the breaking of trust, then you get the horrible situation where someone who is genuine comes along and who's genuinely concerned about you for those things, and you can't read it as being genuine.
Yeah.
And that's what I describe as permanent psychological damage that arises from deep manipulation and betrayal of the type that these agents are being not only taught but rewarded for learning, engaging in. And that's that little, I've got my certificate from the OCAA saying that I've completed the course in fucking people's lives up. This is, what is that? That's a sense of accomplishment. Is it not a part of the hierarchy of needs in and of itself that they award people with a certificate at the completion of this course?
And probably divorce their behaviour from the outcome of destroying.
I'm sure they provide them morning tea and drinks, and I'm sure that they engage with them on, they will themselves be fulfilling the hierarchy of needs of those who they are training in this.
True, that's true. Yeah, and that take on that hierarchy fits with the previous two slides that were basically about befriending people and simulating relationships. Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about it like that in terms of targeting all those needs to befriend somebody, but that does make sense in the context of the previous two slides. And when I first looked at that circle about the uncertainty reduction and the disclosure and the liking, I was thinking exactly what you're thinking. I was thinking, wow, that is really potentially extraordinarily psychologically harmful. If you're doing all of this to simulate a real friendship, real emotional intimacy, especially if people are being targeted, for instance, by virtue of perhaps loneliness and isolation, and that you're really meeting these needs, you just don't, you don't know what
the first thing they're going to work out about anyone is what do they want, what do they lack, what do they lack, and what do they want? Do they want money? Do they want social prestige? Do they want opportunity? Do they want whatever? Do they want love? Do they want, love is one of the most common, this is the thing, relationships, the exploitation of sexual relationships or need for sexual relationships. This is as a fact, one of the most common.
Yeah, well, they talk
about most common avenues.
Separate slide. There's a separate group. These slides are called The Art of Deception, and then there's a separate group of slides called The Art of the Possible, and they talk about that on one of the slides there, about how to discredit a target, and they talk about honey traps or honeypots or whatever they call it, fake sexual relationships. But it's, you know, it's potentially emotionally incredibly damaging. You don't know what someone's childhood history is. You don't know what personal, you know, traumas they've experienced, what you're tugging on, what you're doing to that person by pretending to create emotional intimacy and then betraying somebody.
And the thing is that the level of sophistication is so high, and the expended resource is so high, even limitless. When I studied the Snowden documents, we actually studied the targeting centers, the processes of the targeting centers at NSA. I'd highly recommend that you go back and look at some of those videos. It shows the workflows of these social media targeting and analysis centers, and you discover that every target has dozens of agents working through the life cycle of that target. So you're not dealing with one person. You're not dealing with one twisted asshole like you might in the real world. You have a bad relationship with someone who is a narcissist or whatever. That's one twisted asshole. When you're dealing with these people, you're dealing with teams of assholes who have brainstormed their assholishness. So sorry, I can't come up with a better word for it because it's so immoral. It's so immoral to me. It's so egregious. But you're dealing with like multiple layers of authority, and you're dealing with multiple centers of specialization. There's a whole team just for dealing with investigating your family and your friends and the people around you, who are then producing reports on that to your targeting, to the people who are targeting you. There's a team for the actual interactions with you. There's a team for the CNA, the intrusion of all your devices. Like, it's not just one person that's destroying your life. It's coordinated teams of specialists destroying your life. And I think that's one thing that's really hard for people to get their head around. And that's what I mean by the level of sophistication of it. Because once you come up against that level of sophistication, anything is possible. Anything that confronts you in your life could have anything behind it, and you would never know. So everything becomes untrustworthy. And how I discovered to deal with that is two things. One, to study the methodologies employed and not the people, as we've discussed previously. But two, to go the opposite way and give everybody a chance. So you'll see, like, when I run campaigns, I'm on Discord, it's unencrypted. I let total strangers join. I let them join by the 100 or by the 1,000, because it actually increases my ability to be successful, to open, to deliberately make myself open to large numbers of people, than to attempt to protect myself in a tight and small environment, which is inevitably penetrated by these highly sophisticated actors. So I dilute their effectiveness by using mass numbers.
Very good strategy, to give everybody a chance rather than to become suspicious and mistrustful, because making people suspicious and mistrustful is, that's one of the goals. I mean, when they have that box about trust in one of the earlier slides, obviously that's one of the things that they're trying to do, is make people mistrustful and suspicious, and then to become more isolated because you're cutting people off and you're not forming bonds and you're not having a support network. And so that's it's fine. I think that's a really smart
and I mean
strategy.
their agenda is always isolation, and so any method you can come up with that will combat the isolation is a win in my books.
Yes,
and that's just the way that instinctively I developed to try to deal with that. But that's I mean, other people work in different ways. Many activists won't do that, will not do what I do, but that's just what I found that works for me. And also, coming from a background like Occupy, that approach comes very naturally to me, because Occupy was dealing in the real world with large numbers of people, total strangers, etc., etc. So it's not an intimidating environment for me. I've been conditioned to be comfortable in that environment by having been exposed to it in the past. But I can understand how people who haven't been in large movement organized or anything like that might find it really intimidating to be surrounded by people you don't know. So it's not a one fits all solution, but it's just what I've found to make work for me. Okay, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to wrap it here, and I'm going to hope that for the fourth time, if possible, you'll come back and knock this off with me next week, because I really, 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 really want to get into the group dynamics slides, because those slides about fracturing groups are finding
that's important
for exploiting them. That is one of the most key documents ever in relation in the public arena in relation to how to destroy movements, and particularly relevant to WikiLeaks and the movement to free Julian. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a pivotal slide. I mean, we've explained the theoretical underpinnings of it, but we could flesh out how it happens in the real world more.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, so I'll be around next Monday. So
thank you so much. Sunday night for most people, Monday if you're in Aussie or New Zealand. We will be starting next week on the minute of 7:31 p.m. Graham Elwood's stream, Graham, who's generously allowing us to simulcast at his channel, Graham's stream will be finishing at 7:30, and then we'll be coming on right on the back of that, and I will do all my testing my gear and being sorted well beforehand, and hopefully we won't hit up against any of the same problems. Thank you all for being here tonight. I really, really appreciate it, and thank you for being kind to me and letting me have a shorter stream so I can actually get some sleep for once in my life. I will see you next Sunday night. Thank you for supporting us. Again, please share, because word of mouth is all we have when we're dealing with topics like this. Please share the website, oneversus5i.com. Please encourage people to donate at oneversus5i.com/donate. Follow at oneversus5i on Twitter. Follow at Lissa K. Johnson. Is this correct?
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Great. I'm sure social media people will put a link to your Twitter, because your work has been seminal, actually. And
thank you, Susie.
As it relates to your field and to Julian's situation specifically. And on this stream, because really this is unprecedented to be able to discuss this from your professional standpoint, these specific documents. I don't know if that ever haven't been done before. Thank you, everyone. It's overdue. It's definitely overdue, but I'm proud that we're doing it. It was a hope for a long time. This is something I wanted to do, so I'm really happy that we've got out there and done it.
Thank you for having me on to do it.
You're so welcome. See you all next Sunday or Monday. Ka kite anō. Thank you. Hi, my name is Susie. I'm an activist and a journalist from Auckland, New Zealand. For years, I've worked on controversial issues like the corruption of our intelligence agencies. I was severely targeted as a result of my work. This led to my articles being amplified by the world's most accomplished publisher. In 2016, I made a documentary about how and why I was forced to leave my country. I have now sought refuge in Russia, and my situation has become public.
On 882 6PR, the voice of Perth. It's 12:30 right now, and Tony with you, and I'm really happy we finally got through to Moscow to my friend over there, Susie Dawson.
You're listening to a 95BFM podcast.
Susie Dawson is a Kiwi activist and journalist who worked as a member of Occupy Auckland's media team at that time. Now, 5 years later and following involvement in GCSB and TPPA opposition, she's seeking asylum in Russia, alleging she has been spied on, harassed and threatened by the police.
Welcome back to The Wire. Now, finally on the show today, last week it was announced that Susie Dawson will be the new leader of the Internet Party.
Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a special guest with us. It's Susie Dawson. She's an activist, journalist, former party leader, and current president of the Internet Party.
Susie Dawson, an activist and citizen journalist currently seeking asylum in Moscow. Susie has written extensively on surveillance and the deep state and claims it's not safe for her in New Zealand.
My name is Craig Tuck. I'm a lawyer from New Zealand. I act in the area of international human rights. I act for Susie Dawson, along with a group of other lawyers throughout the world who act for journalists and dissenters in high-profile cases, including the case of Julian Assange. As far back as 2012, Susie has been trying to warn New Zealanders and other citizens around the world about state targeting and surveillance of citizens and the methods being used to do it.
Surveillance in New Zealand is now so widespread, it's not an issue of police going and getting a warrant and doing an investigation and then it all coming out in court. The vast majority of the surveillance that's undertaken is never going to be aired in a courtroom. And by that I'm talking about cell phone technologies. I'm talking about lawful interception is the term that the companies that do this like to use. There is a corporation in Wellington, New Zealand called SSI Corp. And you can Google them and you can look at their website. And on their website, they're so good as to explain at length exactly what they do and how legal it is for them to do it. And essentially, they can intercept virtually any communication. If they have someone at range, they can hear your actual conversations, but also through cell phones, they can essentially turn them into microphones and hear any conversation that's had within vicinity. They can see your text messages, they can see what photos are on your phone, they can see what files are on your phone, they can read your emails, they can just intercept all kinds of information.
Any intelligence service in the world that has significant funding and a real technological research team can own that phone the minute it connects to their network. As soon as you turn it on, it can be theirs. They can turn it into a microphone, they can take pictures from it, they can take the data off of it. But it's important to understand that these things are typically done on a targeted basis.
Not only was Susie essentially blowing a whistle on state-level spying, she was naming the precise entities that years later it would be proven had in fact been doing it.
And the fact that these are private corporations that are doing it should be really concerning to us. The crowd that they outsourced it to was TCIL, which was, I believe, Thompson and Clark Investigations Limited. The state is contracting a private company to surveil you. To me, that's really immoral, absolutely immoral.
Some 6 years later, in December 2018, an official State Services Commission report confirmed that New Zealand government agencies had been employing Thompson and Clark Investigations Limited to target New Zealand citizens. This is a private company that had essentially been instructed by state agencies and departments to spy on citizens.
More than a dozen police staff are under investigation for passing sensitive information to the private investigators Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark. Security firm Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
So Thompson and Clark, aren't some of them old police officers?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so does that explain the relationship and the free flow of information? Doesn't it actually seem a bit crass?
Well, at the end of the day, I guess what I trust is people's intent.
The report identifies perhaps inappropriately close relationships, morning teas paid for by Thompson and Clark, invitations to go out for drinks. Were there other companies identified where you inappropriately gave them information, or just Thompson and Clark?
There are a myriad of security companies who inquire of police every day. For instance, insurance security.
But that's not my question. People listening to this will think, hey, Thompson and Clark were getting stellar, top shelf, gold star treatment from the police. Why? Do you treat other security firms the same as you were treating this one? Yeah. How do you seriously think it looks to members of the public listening to this?
Thompson and Clark hasn't just been paid by the government to spy on Greenpeace and earthquake claimants in Christchurch. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal the controversial security firm has been also monitoring the activities of another 3 activist groups in Northland, Coromandel and Wellington, and the activities of at least 1 further claimant.
Susie has been involved at the very highest levels, with people facing charges from prosecutions coming out of the Eastern District Court of Virginia in the United States. There are more prosecutions to follow of currently unnamed persons. Importantly, information will be coming out in the months to come that will provide transparency and clarity and lead to accountability. Suppression and prosecution of dissenters can't be allowed in New Zealand or elsewhere. That's why Susie's team is launching the hashtag 1versus5i campaign, and with your help can achieve some important victories for democracy and for each and every one of us.